Hello and welcome back to our first English lesson of the week. And what we're going to use is the ideas that we came up with in Friday's live session in order to write the start of our story. And we're going to do this in our usual way with a shared write. So I'm going to start writing it and then you're going to finish off the next part of it. And we'll go from there. And it's just to see how we can use some of the tricks in our writing as we go along. So the yellow for today is can I use the shared box up to write the next part of the story? Before we do that, we're going to have a quick look at some of the grammar features we could put in it. We have a look at a little challenge to see whether or not you can find them in a paragraph. So find and underline a label each example of figurative language in the next paragraph. Remember, we did a little bit about it. So on your checklist, you might find a hyperbole, which is an exaggerated statement that claims you can't really take it literally, but it over-exaggerates. You might have an onomatopoeia, which is the sound, the word sounds like the sound itself. You might have a metaphor, which is a word or a phrase that's applied to an object. You're saying something is something else, even if it isn't. You might have a simile, very similar to a metaphor, but you're saying something is like or as something else rather than is something else. An allusion, which is when you allude to something. So what you're saying is that you're trying to get them to have a picture in their head or something in their mind without actually mentioning it yourself. It's a little bit of that hinting the unknown and that sort of thing. You're just talking about it in passing without being very direct about what you're talking about. An idiom is a phrase normally that means something, but it doesn't mean that if you took it literally. If you just took it for what the words were written, it wouldn't make any sense, but you know there's a phrase to that that means that things like I'm over the moon, meaning that I'm happy, but that's not what over the moon means. You might have personification, which is giving something which isn't living, a non-human thing, a human quality or human form. And finally, alliteration, which is the occurrence of the same letter at the beginning or the same sound at the beginning of a word that are closely connected. They don't have to be next to each other, but are closely connected to each other. So I'm going to show you the paragraph. You're going to pause and see what you can do. So here's our paragraph. Pause now, have a look through and just write down any that you see. You can obviously go back, have a look at our list and see if you can pick them out easily. And then we'll go through it probably in the live session. Have a go. Pause now and have a go. Okay, hopefully that was quite tricky to do. There were some that were slightly easier in there. It's just trying to make you notice things when you're looking at what you're reading and what things people are putting there. And the obvious one is crunch, and that's an onomatopoeia. And I'll give you that one for free, but what you're trying to do is pick them out. I hope you had a good go at it anyway. I have written a few notes down, and we'll go through it in our live session, the first live session we have. Okay, so here's our shared write. We've got an anticipation, dream, frustration, nightmare, and miraculous escape. And these were the ideas that we came up with in our live session on Friday. So they shouldn't be new to you. We did them all together. And what we're going to focus on is the anticipation and the dream. I'm going to start to write the anticipation for you, talking through how I come up with my ideas. And then you're going to have a go at writing the dream. So I will show you how I would start. Okay, so you can see here that I've taken the anticipation out and got the ideas there for me. And the reason I've done that is so that I can see them whilst I'm writing, and I can use the ideas we've got there to help me think about what I'm going to write. And we said first off that we were going to start with something like come close and gather round, like you're telling a story to somebody. So let's use those ideas. We're talking to the people around us. So come closer gather round my fire, and I will share with you an epic adventure. And we start that way because what we're trying to do is get the idea that we're going to tell them a story. Now, we could, if we wanted to change the word epic, we could come up with a few different words around this. Have a think about what different things we could do. So we could have, rather than epic adventure, we could have marvelous, we could have miraculous, outstanding, lots of different choices we could have around the word epic. We're still talking in first person. We're still telling the story, which is why it's got the I there, and that comes across in how we're trying to tell the story. And it shows it off being informal in the way in which we're going to talk about it. So we'll see whether or not we can use this to our advantage later on. I'm going to leave it with epic at the moment, but if you decide you wanted to change that word, then you're more than welcome to. This is a good word to be able to change. We'll think about what we might put in there in its case. So I've stated, come closer, gather round my fire, and I will share with you an epic adventure. We need to have an idea, something to draw them in. So what sort of story is it going to be about? Well, we know that it's going to involve some sort of monsters, some sort of beasts, and that it's been told a long, long time ago. Now, these two sentences are going to be really intrinsically linked. So we're going to think about how that this is, we're going to link the two sentences together. And we're going to give an idea of what the story is. It's a story of something like brave, somebody being brave. So we could use bravery, courage. We can go with courageous. So we'll go with courageous. Of courageous feats, and don't worry if you spell things wrong, we know we can always go back and change them as we go along. Courageous feats, feats being things that you've done, so active like exploits or adventures that you've done before. And beasts, but maybe we want another word just in here to describe those beasts. So we could think about it. We could use one. We could use gruesome from our model text. Grisly we could use, or ghastly. And I'm going to use ghastly as my word. I'm going to put that one in there. Okay. So let's quickly just get rid of what we got here. Ghastly. Okay, so let's go back and just add in that word in there. Ghastly. Something else about the story we know. So we know that it's about courageous feats and ghastly beasts. Courageous and ghastly work nice. Courageous feats and ghastly beasts. It sounds nice together. Now when you think about how far long ago it was, so it's been told again and again and again. So a story told around the fires, around the bonfires, around a situation where lots of people gather around the halls of many a king for well over 100 years or more. So what we're doing is just giving an idea that this story's been told again and again over a long period in lots of different places. So a story told around the halls of many a king for well over 100 years or more. So maybe we only need, so let's read this through and just see how it sounds. Come closer, gather round my fire, and I will share with you an epic adventure. A story of courageous feats and ghastly beasts, a story told around the halls of many a king for well over 100 years or more. Maybe we don't need the word well. Let's read it without it. A story told around the halls of many a king for over 100 years or more. Yes, it sounds better. So let's get rid of well. We don't need that bit in there. I remember we were talking about sometimes we put too much in. We don't necessarily need it. It's always good to put it in, but then we can change it as we go along to see if we can't make it better. That's actually going to be my first paragraph. If we think back to our model text, you can see that that's it. We had that small start to our writing that just brings out that first bit. So what we now need to do is set the scene. We're thinking about a kingdom. We know it's going to be in Norway. We probably need to introduce Glendora, the fierce shield maiden, and the building of the dragon wall, the great defensive wall to protect her people and the city or kingdom. So let's think back. We need to go back, travel back in time. So back, far back in the midst of time. And that just puts it in people's head that we're traveling far back. You're trying to get them involved in what they're doing to pull them into your story, try and get them to think about traveling back with you. A little bit more description. So when the world was young, Norway, because that's where we're setting it, was a wild and dangerous place. And all we're trying to do is set the scene again. We're kind of giving the hint that we're talking about Norway, and we're talking about the fact that it's a dangerous place to be. Now let's hint at the fact that we're talking about, or what monsters we're talking about. So we're going to hint at the fact of dragons. We're not going to necessarily name Rage as our main dragon. We're just going to think that there are maybe more than one dragon. So dragons, again, we need a word that probably goes in here to describe those dragons. So tyrannical, we could use going back to words that we've used before. Gruesome, again, we could link to those, but we've already used ghastly. So another word that means similar to gruesome. How about hideous? So hideous dragons roamed the frozen pine forests or monster-filled forests. The frozen forests actually sounds quite nice. It's an alliteration as well. Roamed the, can we think of another F word? Roamed the frozen forest, the ferocious frozen forest. Could we have that? We could. Maybe I'll just go with frozen forest just to keep it nice and simple. The frozen forests. So hideous dragons roam the frozen forests. And we're actually just going to leave it at that. Remember, sometimes we don't need huge scripting. We're just hinting at what's there. We're not going into massive amounts of detail. So now let's introduce Glendora. So let's introduce what she is first. A fierce shield maiden, because that's what we decided she was going to be. Shield maiden, and also remember we get then to use a kenning of summarising. A fierce shield maiden. Let's put one of those parentheses to give an additional name. Let's add her name in. So Glendora. A fierce shield maiden. Glendora was her name. And what we're trying to do is we're still trying to keep it in the phrasing of how stories would have been told in Anglo-Saxon time. So we're just trying to add that in if we go along in order to try and make it more like we're writing it at that time rather than writing it now in the style that we write it now. Remember, we came up with loads of names that we could have used, but they didn't sound Anglo-Saxon enough to make them work where we're going to use it. So a fierce shield maiden, Glendora was her name. Refused. Remember, that parenthesis we can actually take out. So a fierce shield maiden refused to let those fire breathing, we're hinting at something to come later, fire breathers, kenning, but also hints at the fact that they can breathe fire. We use that later in our story. It's called foreshadowing. It's letting people know that there's something that they can do, and you're already telling them that that might be important later on. Nice trick when you're writing. Can refuse to let those fire breathers ruin her, and we talked about it just being her settlement, her village, her home, her people. So if we say village, we're going to keep this slightly smaller, but because it also makes sense that you can build a wall around a village, but building a wall around an entire kingdom might be slightly harder. And this is one of the things when we talk about looking at our plan up here, we can always change things as we go along. We want to use this as a basis. So we can think, oh, we've used that one, we've used that idea, we've used that idea. We've changed the fact that she's a queen and used shield maiden instead. Just what we're doing is we're going on, just changing things slightly in order to think about how we're telling our story. And we don't know that until we write it. So we just change it slightly as we go along, keeping to the base parts of it. And obviously you could go, if you wanted to rewrite this a little bit yourself, you could change them back to being a queen. You could change things as you go as well. But I'm just giving you an idea as we go along. So what did she do? She ordered work. Ordered work on a great defensive wall, a great stone barrier. Yes, a great stone barrier. Can anyone think what I might have done there? Yeah, he's the kenning, trying to just keep those, try and keep it in touch with being an Anglo-Saxon story, to surround the village. Or her village. Let's keep her ownership of it, just so it makes it more important. Her, to surround her village. And we want to talk about keeping the dragons, keeping those troublesome. Those troublesome dragons at bay or in their own layers. I don't know, to keep those troublesome dragons from causing havoc. We're just trying to make it so that it seems like they're this barrier. We could talk about what they might call it. So a great stone barrier. Let's use a different variety of princess. The dragon wall. Add that in there. And you can see, you can kind of go back and think about it before. So let's read what we've got so far. Far back in the midst of time when the world was young, Norway. Probably needs just to split that slightly. Dragons. When the world was young, Norway was a wild and dangerous place. Hideous dragons roamed frozen forests. A fierce shield maiden, Glendora was her name, refused to let those fire breathers ruin her village. She ordered work on a great stone barrier, the dragon wall. The great dragon wall? No, just the dragon wall. The dragon wall, to surround her village, keeping those troublesome dragons from causing havoc, not keeping them causing havoc. And you can see that you need to read your work back through yourself in order to make it sense. Because if we had left it like that, keeping those troublesome dragons causing havoc actually means that they're still causing havoc. But we want to say that this will stop them from doing that. So keeping those troublesome dragons from causing havoc makes a massive difference to a sentence. And everyone needs to think about what they're doing in order to keep it their own, as in you're trying to make sure that your sentences make sense for what you want to be told, and you need to read through your own in order to know that sentence would have made perfect sense, keeping those troublesome dragons causing havoc, but it just doesn't make sense of what we're talking about. So you have to check it makes sense as you go along. So she has to finish it. So soon there it stood, made of the most magnificent, and we're here trying to think about using some of the tricks that we might have used before. Check our spelling. Magnificent marble, a type of rock. That's very, very hard. Stronger than even the most heroic heroes. We're just talking about the fact that this is the reason why she had to build it. Let's hint at something. Indestructible. Or so they thought. And then we can put our ellipsis in there. We actually need to change this. This is still thought. Again, we need to read it back through to ourselves. Thought. And we can change this actually. These are linked together, so it is part of the same thing. So made of the most magnificent marble, stronger than even the most heroic heroes, indestructible, or so they thought. So we're just hinting at the fact that something is going to go wrong. And the next bit we need to think about is when it was complete, we need to wake the dragon from their sleep due to their hunger. We need to make rage up. And rage needs to wake up. And we know that rage is the most powerful dragon. But I'm going to leave it there. So I'm going to let you finish the anticipation. I want you to continue to write this for me. Think about what happens in Beowulf's story. They throw a big party, huge amounts of noise and dancing. That can then wake up rage, the most powerful dragon there is. And as he wakes from his hunger, he wakes from his sleep, he feels that hunger and then goes out. And you can use that inside-outside idea. Inside the walls, the people made merry as they laughed and danced away the night. Outside the walled kingdom, however, something began to smoulder. Or outside the walled village, something woke from its slumber. All you're trying to do is hint at the fact that something is happening outside. So, your task for today, what I want you to do, I want you to use these two sections, the anticipation and the dream, and I want you to finish them. Use the ideas that come from my shared write. Just go back and pause it, and you can write it out yourself. And then continue the story until the end of the dream, when Elodia agrees to save the village before we come on to the initial fight, or finding Rage and the fight itself. Good luck. I'm looking forward to seeing them. In tomorrow's lesson, we'll look at our next section. I'll start writing the frustration with you, and you can finish off that and the rest of the story. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.